Welcome back, everybody. Clayton Vance, your host here on the Timeless Homes podcast. We are number 2 right now. The last time we talked about some questions and just kind of who I am and why I'm doing this. And today we're going to dive into some broad level analysis. It should be pretty fun. It should be fun. Some people will be completely insulted, but most of you will have fun with this. And then some of you will realize, oh, so that's why my house kind of is ugly. Or I shouldn't say that. Oh, so that's why my house actually won't look timeless in 100 years. So it's nice. Once again, I encourage you to watch this, since architectural discussions of this nature, particularly in a podcast, are visual, and so it'd be a lot better to watch it than it would be just to listen to it. But I think we'll get some. You can get a lot out of just listening to it anyway, if you're just doing some other stuff in the background, and this is just in the background while you're doing other stuff that are more important than this, because there's a lot of stuff more important than this. But I've got my handy dandy tablet here that we're going to be drawing on, and I'm going to be recording on. We'll be doing some drawing and analysis and looking at some neighborhoods, just random neighborhoods, and just point out some of the things that are part of this discussion today. So if you think about back to the last podcast, we introduced a bunch of questions, and one of the questions we want to deal with today is, why are we seemingly incapable of producing houses and or neighborhoods that are still aesthetically viable and or visually relevant, right, in 100 years, in 200 years, and 300 years? Because if you go back to those old traditional historic things, they are still visually relevant. And why can't we seem to build them today unless we're part of the super uber rich crowd, and can actually afford those real details, right? But for people like you, people like me, how can we demand out of our builders and the subcontractors who are working on the homes just a better quality of craftsmanship, and also the people who are designing the houses, because it all starts there, better design. So that's the question. Why are we incapable of producing stuff that in 100 years from now will be relevant? So let's start with some very broad level analysis before we get into the nuances of design. That will be for future podcasts. But for this one, let's go with something I think we can all relate to. And some of you have heard this word before, some of you have not heard this word before, but it is the McMansion. Have you heard that word before, the McMansion? If you have, you probably know what it is. And if you haven't, I'm going to introduce it to you, because it's honestly the best way to describe what is wrong with the building climate and culture today. Because when you think of McStuff, right? So think of McStuff, just McDonald's. Congratulations, McDonald's. I'm not going to bash on you. I'm just talking about the realities of what you've actually produced, which is honestly good old, Ray Kroc taking a play out of Henry Ford's book and just doing that whole mass production rather than in cars and hamburgers, right? And so what has that done for us, this mass production of stuff? When we think of McDonald's, we think of the mass production of hamburgers, right? And honestly, one other really fairly regrettable thing is kind of empty calories. And so if we were to look at any sort of thing we put Mick in front of, the Mick this, Mick that, Mick stuff, what are we referring to? We're referring to this kind of this generic replication of something that is completely disposable, right? And it can be modified in whatever ways, but there isn't a real individuality to it. There's no real artistry to it. When you go eat a real hamburger versus a Big Mac, Anyway, we won't get into that. But let's just talk about McMansions, right? Architecturally speaking, McStuff. Um, what has what has happened? So let's think of in terms of just production. Materials now that we use to build houses are incredibly mass produced and pretty uniform and pretty engineered. So what has that done for us? It allows us to build bigger houses for cheaper. And the production of those houses and cities and stuff is become more efficient and cheaper. And so it allows more of us to get into homes. And I mean, that's really in essence been not only the American dream, but kind of the world dream. And honestly, I mean, still is. Eventually, as whatever generation we call this generations is growing up that doesn't think they'll be able to get into real estate or into a house or a condo or a townhouse or whatever, and or whoever else, eventually there's something about having real estate, a title in your name. You're like, wow, I own that piece of something. And that sense of ownership really does, it grounds you, right? But I mean, that's another discussion for another time, talking about communities and that type of stuff. But what that mass production has done is allowed more of us to be able to get into a situation. The other thing the mass production sorry, I need to go back here. One of the drawbacks that mass production has done is made everything completely uniform, right? And so the individuality of all the artistry, the artisans, the back in the I guess thousands of years ago, the Latin term was translated as the mechanical arts, and that's really how artisans were thought of: stonemasons and finished carpenters and bricklayers and all these guys who would use their trade, their skill, and their craft to create beautiful things. And there was a lot of pride taken in what the talents and skills and abilities were. And that has been one of the really, 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 really regrettable kind of just byproducts, is the death of a large amount of artisans who can do these things. We still have some, and they are awesome. They're really, really good. But there's just not very many anymore. And we don't value that societally much. And we should. We absolutely should, because they make our world more beautiful. And, as we talk about this McMansion, I'm going to talk about what it is, right? And if you're a lover of modern architecture, it applies to modernism too. It's not just applicable to traditional design. It applies to everything. And we'll talk about why. So this idea that of the McMansion being a more or less hollow representation of the real thing. I shouldn't say hollow representation, but maybe the better word is inauthentic representation of the real thing. So if I have a McMansion rather than a mansion, but a McMansion rather than a mansion, what I have is something that is trying to be a mansion or an estate house or something like that doesn't quite reach it, that is a representation enough of it that we can see the kind of the intent, like, oh, this is what they're trying to do, but it's just kind of like, we missed that mark by quite a ways, sometimes more than others. And so rather than actually achieving the true character of stuff in times past, we end up building a caricature. And you've heard that word before, and that is an exaggeration of a form. It's a cartoon, right? And so when you're drawing a cartoon, in order to make it comical, funny, or whatever, what you're doing is you're taking features of the thing that you're drawing the cartoon of, the authentic original thing, and you're exaggerating various elements, aspects, and features in a manner that still gives you the representation of the thing, so you can still tell what it is, but is everything's exaggerated. The proportions are off, the scale is wrong here and there, and it's a fake representation of it, and it's supposed to be. And so it's not like good or bad if it's done deliberately and done as either satire or commentary or something like that. It's totally fine, right? But when we're actually trying to actually draw the real thing as an artist, if we are out there trying to draw a person rather than drawing a cartoon, and we're trying to do a like representation of the character of the subject, we don't want to draw a cartoon. And if all we can do, the best we can do, is a cartoon, it's like, okay, well, I guess we just do a cartoon, because we actually don't have the skill and or talent level or education, training, capabilities to do a real good likeness of the original thing. And that is, I mean, in an essence, what's going on with the idea of the McMansion. Really, it's the pinnacle of the idea of more, where you look at some of these old mansions, and sometimes they're really austere, but very ordered, with all the right details in all the right places. And then sometimes what the Victorians came along, or castles and all that type of stuff, and then they just added more stuff, more fluff, more everything. But they were still very cohesive in their design. And we look at these things thinking to ourselves that, okay, well, if it worked for them, I assume we get character by just adding more and more and more stuff. And so we just add more gables, we add more materials, we add more window varieties, window types, window styles. Let's combine styles. Let's do Spanish, colonial, and Victorian, and every other thing under the sun, and just hodgepodge and mishmash them together into this crazy thing. I mean, really, what it is, it's like we went through the buffet and put every single topping on our hamburger, on our Mc whatever we eat, right? It's like, and I'm sorry, but anchovies and peppers and chocolate and strawberries and stuff don't all go together really well, right? It would be kind of gross. And that's what we've done, architecturally speaking, to our houses. And that is really the reason why it's visually unsatisfying, and we are caught up in the idea of the new. So if it's new, a new material, new just house, that newness, the newness is the thing that has the appeal. And as that newness wears off, it just looks dated, and the appeal wears off also. It doesn't age with grace, because the elements that give it character were missing. So we're going to talk about those elements that give it character another time, but we're going to analyze some things about the McMansion and the differences today. But before we get into that, we need to talk about why they happen, why we design them this way. Because they wouldn't get built this way if we didn't design them this way. And the reason we design them this way is because we design from plan out. If we need a little, just a quick introduction to architectural speak, right? Little jargon for you is plan, section, and elevation. Those are the three things that we always talk about in architecture: plan, section, elevation. Plan, we all know what a plan is, a floor plan, and we love designing floor plans, especially if we're designing a new house, and it's fun. We think we know what we're talking about. Most of the time, they're out of scale, and anyway. And then there's section. Plan, section, elevation. The section is as if we got the building as it was constructed and just cut it somewhere, right? Sliced it like a sandwich and saw what we're looking at through where we cut it. And so it shows us how the structure is put together, what the roof trusses or roof framing looks like, and how the walls align, that type of stuff. And then elevation is really important. And that is the facade. It's a two-dimensional representation of what our three-dimensional experience is when we actually experience a house, right? And so it's the house flat, and what that does for us is it allows builders to and subcontractors and craftsmen to be able to actually construct the house based on the elevation, because you can dimension off of it, you can see what the overall character is, and when you're designing it, you can do proportional studies and that type of stuff. So when you design from the plan out without consideration of the elevation or consideration of the section, you end up with the McMansion, because you didn't give due consideration to the whole holistic or comprehensiveness of the entire design. And I will give you a little demonstration of what happens. And one of the just interesting consequences is the lack of four-sided design. Because if you go to a mansion, since we're saying McMansion and mansion, if you go to a mansion, like a real one, right, that sits on 3 acres or more, and there is a difference between urban lots and rural lots, and a kind of an estate type of house versus an urban estate, and how the architecture relates to both each other in the context of the neighborhood and itself, and how it's designed and how it relates to the street. But McMansions typically are trying to be the estate type house on land. And I consider estate stuff anything over 3 acres, because that generally gives you enough space that you can have a fairly substantial size house with enough space around it that you can see all 4 sides of the house, and you look at the house or experience the house from all 4 sides. It's not just supposed to be experienced from the street or from the front, which is an urban setting. And so we've shrunk these this building type, this mansion type, into a pseudo, what we call suburban situation, where we still only design just the front facade, the front elevation, and we don't actually give any due consideration for the other 3 sides. Where if we were really looking at an estate type of house, which is what these are trying to be, as an estate type of house, is you need to design all 4 sides, and you can't design all 4 sides if you're only just looking at the plan. It just doesn't work. So, like I said, you go visit timelesshome.org to watch this, because I'm going to start drawing now, or YouTube, or whatever means, wherever else we throw this thing, right? And follow along, because this should be somewhat educational. I have this conversation just over and over and over again, and this is why we're doing this podcast in the first place, is so we can all get on the same page and start talking the same language, rather than talking about houses as products. We can start talking about houses as houses. And I'm going to be sniffling a lot, and I apologize for that. Stinking allergies. It's like, welcome to being 40. All of a sudden you get, I'm in my mid-40s now, and I get all sorts of random ailments that I never had before, and one of those things is allergies. So, I apologize for the sniffles. I didn't take my medicine this morning because I'm not used to it. So, in designing plan out, what we'll have typically is something like this. So I'm just going to sketch this out. Okay, I'm going to have an entry right here, and then I'm going to have an office off the entry, and it's going to come out a little bit, and then I'm going to have, like a great room in the back. Oh, I need a garage, and so I'm going to put a garage, and I want to enter in from the side, and so I'm going to enter in from the side, and then I need kind of like a mudroom and bathroom and stuff, and then that might sit back a little more, and I have a hallway or something that goes to a master suite, and on that master suite I have like a closet and a bathroom with a little pop out where my tub might be over here, and then I want a porch in the back, and so I'm going to cover this part of it for a porch, and then I might have a little pop out in the front on the garage, and so that's how we do it, isn't it? And And so if you were to see, if you were to look at what I'm drawing, it's just, kind of like or how we start stuff with almost like bubble diagrams, even though it's a little bit more squared off than straight up bubble. But what I want to show you is how many jogs there are in this plan. And when we look at these things, and I run into this with HOA stuff all the time, and HOA and the people who run HOAs and whoever writes design guidelines for HOAs, you guys are the culprits, and I beg of you to please, please, please listen to this and pay attention to what I'm talking about, because it is HOA design guidelines which are destroying just destroying neighborhoods for the future. Because of things that are written into HOA design guidelines, like break the facade every 30 feet by at least 3 feet, put at least 3 different materials on your front facade. All of these ideas, though well-intentioned, and I get that, because you don't want something super static, and when you try to do something traditional in today's world, oftentimes because the details are lacking and the proportions are off, you'll get something that looks really, really bad, like really bad. And so if you're doing a 5-bay colonial that you got all the details wrong and all the proportions wrong, and you used really crappy materials like vinyl siding, even though some people would disagree with me that it's crappy material, particularly those selling vinyl siding, and I'm sorry for that, guys, would be like really crappy house. It just ends up being a really crappy house, and it just looks bad because the windows are too far forward. They don't set back in the wall plane far enough, and you don't have the details right. And so what we've thought, and this is how we got to this point, was okay, if we're going to make this actually look good so it's not completely visually bland, all right, well, let's give it visual interest, quote unquote. There's my air quotes for you. Give it visual interest by applying all these arbitrary rules, and they are arbitrary. There isn't any foundation, design foundation to these principles at all. They're of just, every 30 feet, set back your, step your facade, or every have 10 materials, blah, 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 blah. It's just, guys, please, let's not do that. So now, if we look at what I've just drawn, it's just a hodgepodge of stuff. Floor plan, it could totally work. Even though you may be looking at it like, Clayton, are you kidding me? You call yourself an architect? Yeah, if we were to draw this a little bit cleaner and nicer, yeah, it would turn into something. But as of right now, it is what it is. So live with it, and let's just go with it here. I'm going to take the opacity of this down a little bit, and I'm going to make myself a new layer and then figure out, okay, how would I draw this in elevation? Because that's the real question. And one of the difficulties is, how on earth am I supposed to roof this thing? That's the question. How do you roof it? So if I bring down my lines, I drop my elevation lines from my plan, and then I have a garage, and so the garage has got to be X feet tall, and then I want, some sort of gable or something, and then I want some shed roof off that, and I could put some windows here, and then I'm going to have the eave line pretty low, but on the entry I want a really tall entry, and so I'm going to have a nice tall entry because we always want tower entries, and that's also not historic, but we can talk about that another time. And then have to somehow connect this, and then we have this hipped roof because we don't know how to solve it. And a hipped roof is a roof that's sloped on 4 sides, and then we start coming down, but because there's all these jogs in it, it actually starts stepping down and stepping down and stepping down. And then we'll jog it up, we'll move the eave line up and down in order to make visual interest and make more bays, and then start putting in dormers, and we'll have like an arch dormer here, with a little window because we'll probably put a room up there, and then we'll put a large arch dormer here. And a dormer is a window system in the roof, right? And we'll square it off rather than rounding the top of the window, and then we'll maybe put an arch also in the front entry to distinguish it and give it visual interest. And we'll put a big giant keystone that actually doesn't relate to anything except itself, and then two tall skinny posts that are super tall and so-called awesome, which they have issues, and we will talk about that. And this is how tall the door actually is, but then we have a giant arched window above the door, and it's probably like a fan light, and so we have these things and more grids, and then we're gonna have like a window here that doesn't relate to the other window, and then like a window system here that doesn't relate to those, and maybe in this room right off the front entry we're gonna have a bay of oh no, let's do something fun. Let's do a Palladian window here, and a Palladian window is an arched window in the center with two square windows on the sides, but because we don't know the proportions or how they're supposed to go, we just do it. And since that interrupts our eave, let's do a little gable here, and then we can justify that visually, so-called. And then we'll, just because we want to, let's put rather than having this as a hit back here, let's put one more gable because we like gables. So there's another gable that will come, and this is the beginning of our, and then we'll put this tiny little window there. This is the beginning of our McMansion, and all of you have seen houses like this because they're everywhere, because this is how we designed the plan out. And you can see what just happened, because if I were to try to do this exact same elevation in something that was super simple, first off, the center line of the house is somewhere where I can't actually do any sort of ordered like 5-bay colonial, so that just doesn't work. And then I can start looking at, okay, well maybe I can put two gables on either side of this thing, and then I can just do this as one gable in the front. It's like, okay, maybe I can start playing with this, but how I've cut up the facade, now what do I do with all these breaks? And it's just a giant jumbled mess. So here are some of the major issues. And so we don't have something that's timeless. What we have is something that works in plan. In plan, it works great, functions very, very well. And all we've done is just throw a bunch of stuff on it in order to give it so-called visual interest. And the other thing that we do is on that more vein, we'll just start throwing material after material after material. So let's do this in stone. Let's do this like a trim band, and then let's do this vertical siding up here. And so we'll have stone here, and then we'll do horizontal siding here, and then more stone here. And then let's do brick around. Let's do brick around the front entry all the way to the top, and then let's do brick lintels, brick headers, which should be jack arches. We'll get into that some other time, but they're not jack arches because we don't even know what those are, but we'll teach you. And then we'll put stone around, and then brick lintels, and then we'll just do stucco up here, and then we'll do more vertical siding here, and then more horizontal siding here, and then stone over here, and then we'll transition to shingles up in this gable. Right? We've all seen this, and we've all done it. Right? This is like what we ought to do. But this is not how they designed houses for thousands of years. This is an invention of the last 30 years. And the reason why it's an invention of the last 30 years is because as we got away from these split level houses where we enter right here, and then we have windows up here, windows here, windows here, windows here, and a window here. And these are the houses I grew up in. I grew up in split level houses. And that, honestly, it's weird because those feel like home to me because I grew up in them, right? And this is what I live in now, is a McMansion type of thing. And so I grew up in split, 1960s, 70s, 80s split levels. Now I live in a pseudo McMansion thingy from the 90s, and the split level honestly feels more like home than this McMansion thing does. But then I go back and I travel and I do, stay in all these really awesome and traditional architecture places, and even some awesome. When I was in New Zealand, I stayed in this awesome Airbnb. By the, what is that? The bays, all those bays. You New Zealanders, you know what I'm talking about, up on your northeast shore, and it was a modern design, and the interior spaces and the decks and how they opened up was like, wow, okay, I get it. I get how modernism can be incredibly successful, and why you would do it, and we'll talk about that. But the McMansion thing is just this smattering of ill-proportioned whateverness. No, it's not whateverness, arbitrariness. Like, look at how many window styles I have here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. 9 different window types on a single facade when you should have 2 or 3, maybe even 1. And then what does this house look like on the side? It looks like absolutely nothing because we want to save costs, because we don't feel justified in doing all these details and all this other stuff around the side. So it's a cost saving measure, and then we get more house for less money, and then we think that's a better investment. And when we think of houses as straight up investment tools, we don't think of them in terms of an extension of our value system, right? Or our community. And what we're in essence saying to ourselves and all of our neighbors is the ends that we're trying to shoot for in our homes and our communities and virtually every aspect of life is this transient nature of stuff, this disposability of stuff. The efficiency of the ends is now, rather than and I still hate to use the word beauty, but rather than shooting for beauty, right, we're shooting for efficiency. We're trying to use these things, use the community to increase our financial position. And there's nothing wrong with that until it goes too far and we have like a financial collapse and we completely abuse the system and we just get more than we should actually really have. So let's look at some other examples. Let's pull up Google Earth. Google Earth is such a crazy thing, and it's almost so dangerous to show more of you how it even works, because now you'll all freak out. But this is how we find everything. And for this, what we're going to do is we're just going to go to some random neighborhoods, right, in the U.S. and look, because just to show and draw some examples. And today we have selected as our first victim, and some of you, I guarantee you're going to hate me, right, is Dallas. We're going to Dallas, Texas. And I'm just going to pick some random neighborhood. And we're going to look at some, almost lost my microphone there. We're going to look at some houses. We're just going to drop ourselves into a street view. And most of the times I can pick these things up because it'll be kind of by a golf course community or some funky, weird kind of street design that isn't a grid. And most of the houses there will be some sort of McMansion something. And so let's start here and just plop ourselves down on the street. And so if this is your house, I completely apologize. This has nothing to do with how I feel about you. I have no idea who you are, and I have no idea where this is. But let's just pick some stuff up. Oh, there we are. Oh, this is an older version, so this looks like a probably 80s or early 90s. Oh, someone wanted something blinked out. This isn't the best example. Let's go to a different street. Let's see if we can't find something a little more new. What about here, guys? What we're trying to show is, this will be good. This will show new stuff. all of those points. And what these become is, yeah, perfect. Is oh wow, it's garage storage units, right? Because that's all you see down the street is like garage faces, garage. And is there anything wrong with that? You actually can have some really attractive garages, but let's just dissect this one a little bit, right? Based on everything that I talked about. This one has how many different eave heights? We got an eave height here, 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 here. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different heights. We have brick. If you can find me a historical example where brick actually did this, I'd be really interested to know. But because I've never actually seen that in a historical application. But what do we have? We have it's almost no. I was trying to see if there was an actual, like a Flemish bond going on. The overlay on that brick is interesting. It almost gives it a Flemish bond type of look from my preliminary just quick gander. Oh, but also look, here's our tower in the center, just like we drew with here's your arch, and here's one window type, 3 of those, and then we have them doubled up to another window type. Then we have that's a different window versus that versus that versus that. And sorry to pick on your house, whoever you are, but this is what we're talking about in terms of the McMansion, and it's not that it's bad. The construction of this is probably honestly really good. I don't have any idea, but I mean, heck, that's all precast stone. It's brick. Look, I don't know what the side looks like. We could probably go down the street and just check out the side of this thing and see if that's brick. I can't tell. Oh, yep. He got brick all the way down. That's pretty good. And then on this one, so we have, I mean, the exact same stuff is we have a tower, which is what? This is Romanesque, right? Romanesque or Victorian or something like that. But then we have this big giant gable, then this hip. And because we designed our house in a way that we actually don't know how to resolve it with simple roofs, we have to do hips, and so they just keep going up. And then we have another gable, and then we have, hey, look, consistent windows at least. So we have these consistent windows, and this seems to have some sort of order. But the proportions, materials. Just let's add more. Once again, expensive house, probably. Actually, you people in Texas, I am jealous of your building costs. Your building costs, I don't know, every time you watch Chip and Joanna Gaines, right? It's like, you can't seriously build a house for that much. Not for the rest of us who live in other places in the U.S. Let's just go down this street a little bit and see what else we can find. Oh, here's a good one. There we go. Stone. We got gable upon gable upon gable, and then keep changing the roof type. We got shed roofs, a hipped roof, and then this goes back to a hip on the back. Then this continues down a gable. Then we have this giant window system, and then this it's so funny how predictable it all is. Because we think by putting stone here and then brick here, all of a sudden it adds a bunch of visual interest. And yeah, it does add visual interest. It adds visual chaos is what it adds. And it will be kind of cool for however long the house feels like it's really, really new. And after it no longer feels new, it's not going to really work. And so that's what we're trying to do. Is we're going to be talking about in the future here. So I will give you a break, whatever street I'm on in Dallas, and I'm going to exit the street view, and I will leave you guys alone. Do you want me to attack somewhere else? You know, eventually we can start doing this live stream, and people can just call in and say, hey, go to my street. Let's look at these houses, and that would be kind of fun. Really participation and do a little architectural critique through different neighborhoods. But what I just did can be done in virtually any subdivision on this planet. Particularly in the United States, anywhere in the United States. And in the end, what I've pointed out, those are the things that turn what should be a really nice house into a McMansion. This more stuff, wrong proportions. It's a caricature of the actual real thing. Whereas if you go down, particularly back east and a lot of places in the west and some of your older places, and you look at some of those older houses and you look at the character of those homes that are 100 years old or more, what gives it to them? And that's what we will be starting to address next time. So I think that should be enough for today to digest. I'm going to put my pen back, and thank you for joining me today. I hope this has been educational. I hope you've enjoyed it, and I hope we can continue this discussion another time. So this is Clayton Vance with Timeless Homes for our podcast number 2 on the McMansion, signing out. Until next time.